Montana Territory. 1879, the wind howled through the cottonwoods outside of Helena like it was mourning something lost. Or maybe someone. Victor Boone stepped off his horse just as the last of the sun sank behind the ridge. His coat was caked in trail dust, his boots scuffed from 6 straight days of riding. He was supposed to be picking up new feed sacks and a crate of nails, but when he passed the broken-down barn near the edge of town, he heard something that stopped him cold, a soft sob, then a cough. He pushed the warp door open. Light from the doorway spilled across the straw-covered floor and hit a woman curled up in the corner. She was barefoot. Her dress was torn and stained. One eye was swollen and purpled. Her arms were wrapped around 2 small children, a boy and a girl, huddled against her sides. Her face jerked up when she heard him. "Do not come closer," she said, voice hoarse. "Please." Victor held both hands up. "I will not hurt you," she blinked, unsure. The boy could not have been more than 5, clutched her sleeve. The girl, maybe 3, buried her face in the woman's skirts. "I heard crying," he said quietly. "Are you hurt?" She did not answer right away. Instead, she stared at him like she was weighing whether he was real at all. Dirt streaked her face, but there was something in her eyes, something that had not given up. "Not yet. My name is Victor Boone," he said. "I own a small ranch west of here. I have no quarrel with you." She hesitated. Then finally she spoke. "Edda Ellery," she murmured. "These are my children. His name is Holden. Hers is Hattie." Victor nodded once. "You need help." "No one wants used goods," she said flatly, not looking him in the eye. "That's what they said after what happened to me. They said I was no good now, so they left us here." Victor's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, slow and steady, and crouched down just far enough to be level with her. "You are not goods," he said. "You are a person, a mother, and you are not staying in this barn." She flinched. "Where would we go?" "With me," he said. Edda blinked. "Why?" He looked at her, really looked. At the bruises, the torn dress, the tired eyes, but also the way she cradled the children, the way she put herself between them and a stranger, the way she had not begged or pleaded. She had endured. "Because you are the one I want," he said simply. She stared at him, stunned. "You do not even know me." "Maybe not. But I know what I see, and I know I ain't leaving you here." She said nothing, but her hand tightened around her daughter's back. Victor stood and offered his hand. "You come with me, we will get you warm, fed, safe. That is all I promise for now." Edda looked at his hand. After a long pause, she reached up and took it. Back at the ranch, Victor lit the stove and set water to boil. The children sat quietly near the hearth, wrapped in blankets. Edda sat at the table, watching every movement he made like she expected it all to vanish. "You can sleep in my sister's old room," he said. "She married and moved to Oregon last spring. It's clean, still has a quilt on the bed." Edda nodded slowly. "Thank you." He poured coffee into 2 tin mugs and slid one across to her. She hesitated, then took it. "My husband died of fever last year," she said, voice low. "We had nothing after. His brother took us in, until he started drinking, until he—" She looked down. Victor's hands curled around his mug. He said nothing because he knew words did not fix things like that, but he wanted to find the man and break something. "I ran," she said after a moment. "We got on a freight wagon, me and the children. But when we reached Helena, the driver said he would not haul beggars. He pushed us off. I asked at the general store if anyone needed a cook. The man there said I had too much baggage, that nobody wanted used goods." Victor's jaw tightened. "That man is a fool." Edda looked up at him, surprised. "You are brave," he said. "You are strong. You are a mother who protected her children when no one else did. That is not baggage. That is something to be proud of." Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away. Later, as the children slept, she lingered by the fire. "You really mean to keep us here?" she asked. "I do." "Why?" He met her eyes across the firelight. Because I was raised to believe people deserve better than being left in a barn. She studied him for a long time. Then, finally, her shoulders relaxed just a little. I do not know what to think of you yet, Victor Boone. He gave a quiet smile. That is all right. You have time. By the end of the week, Edda had cleaned the kitchen top to bottom, patched the torn curtains, and taught Holden how to brush the horses without spooking them. Victor came in one afternoon to find her helping Hattie sort dried beans into a tin pail, humming something soft under her breath. He leaned in the doorway, watching her. She caught him looking and gave a small, uncertain smile. You are not used goods, he said again. You are the best thing that has happened to this place in a long time. Edda flushed and turned back to the beans, but she did not stop smiling. The spring thaw came slower than usual that year. Snow still clung to the north edge of the barn roof while the south fields turned to mud. Victor had been out since before first light, breaking ice from the water troughs and checking the fence line that had sagged under winter weight. When he stepped back into the house, shaking off the cold, he found Edda kneeling by the stove, coaxing the fire to stay lit with a twist of dry bark. You're up early, he said, hanging his coat. She didn't look back. Hattie coughed in her sleep, thought I'd warm the kitchen before she woke. Victor stepped closer. The shadows under her eyes were darker than the night before. Still, her hands moved steady, practiced. He crouched beside her, taking up a stick of kindling. You could have let it be. I'd have handled it. I know, she said softly, but I wanted to. They fed the fire together in silence until the flame caught and rose. Edda sat back on her heels, rubbing her palms against her skirt. He watched her face in profile, the curve of her cheek lit faintly orange. I've been thinking, she said quietly, about work. Victor sat back against the wall. You don't have to earn your keep here. I don't want to feel kept, she said, lifting her eyes to his. He nodded slowly. What did you do before? I cooked for the schoolhouse in Bismarck for 3 years. Cleaned too. The teacher let me bring Holden with me back then. You want to take work in town? I'd rather stay close, she said. But maybe I could mend things for the neighbors. Folks always need shirts patched. Victor reached for the fire poker, stirred the coals. Mrs. Hargrove's boy ripped his winter coat last time he came through. She'd pay you for the repair. Edda's brow raised slightly. You still talk to the Hargroves? They trade eggs for feed most winters. I fix their plow when it breaks. She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. Would you mind me taking in work like that? He leaned his head back, tapping the poker against his boot. I'd be proud. That afternoon, while the children napped and Victor hitched the wagon for a supply run, Edda stepped into the small room off the kitchen that had once been used for storage. There was a rocking chair, still in good shape, and a narrow table beneath the window. She wiped the dust from the table and unpacked the sewing kit she'd kept wrapped in an old flour sack since North Dakota. The needles were dull but serviceable. The thread was sparse. When Victor returned, she was stitching a hem with careful, even pulls. He watched from the doorway. You made that dress? He asked. She nodded once. Before Holden was born, it was too long, but now. She glanced down. Now it fits. Looks right on you. She didn't answer, but the thread paused a beat longer than necessary before she resumed. That evening, Victor poured water from the pump into a basin on the back stoop while Edda stood nearby, scrubbing Hattie's small hands with a cloth. The girl laughed when the cold water splashed her toes. Holden found a beetle under the porch, Edda said over the sound of running water. He says it winked at him. Victor chuckled. Boy's got imagination. He's been asking questions. Victor looked up. About what? About where we'll stay for good. She wrung the cloth, twisted it tight between her fingers. I haven't known what to say. He tipped the basin out across the grass. Tell him the truth. What is the truth? He turned toward her, face unreadable in the half-light. That if you want it, you've got a home here. She didn't speak right away. Hattie started humming to herself, a tune with no name. Edda brushed damp curls from her daughter's forehead. And if I stay, what does that mean for you? Victor stepped closer, gently taking the basin from her hands. It means I won't be alone anymore. It means this place will feel lived in again. She looked up, eyes searching his. You're not afraid of what people might say. I've never lived for other people's talk. A gust of wind lifted Edda's hair from her shoulder. She let it fall back without brushing it down. I want to stay, she said finally. But not just because it's warm or safe. Victor's voice was low. Then why? Because when you look at me, I don't feel like a ghost. He didn't reach for her, didn't speak, but his eyes softened in a way she hadn't seen before. That night after the children were asleep, Edda sat on the back step, a shawl wrapped over her shoulders. The stars were sharp against the sky. Victor joined her without a word, handing her a cup of tea, the steam curling between them. She took it without looking. I was 17 when I married. I didn't know what love ought to feel like, only what duty was. He didn't interrupt. He was kind at first, then the sickness came. After he died, I thought maybe that was it, that I'd had my share and the rest would be just getting by. Victor looked out across the pasture. And now, I don't know yet, but I don't feel like I'm just passing through. He shifted slightly, shoulder brushing hers. She didn't pull away. You're not, he said. Edda tilted her head back, eyes tracing the sky. I think I'm beginning to believe that. Victor said nothing more, but he stayed beside her while the stars wheeled overhead, and neither of them moved until the first coyotes sang from the far ridge. The first lamb was born just before dawn, slick and shivering in the weak light. Victor was in the pasture with his sleeves rolled and his hands raw from straw and cold when Edda came down the slope with a pail of warm water and a strip of linen over one arm. You been out all night? She asked, setting the pail near the fence. He rubbed the back of his neck. One ewe was laboring long, didn't want to leave her to it. Edda walked to the fence and leaned her arms on the top rail, watching the lamb totter forward on spindly legs toward its mother. I never saw one born before, she said after a minute. It's quieter than I thought. Victor gave a low hum. They don't make much noise unless something's wrong, she glanced at him. That a comfort or a worry? He gave her a tired half grin. Bit of both. She passed him the linen. He knelt beside the lamb and wiped its face gently. The ewe let out a low sound, not quite a bleat. She's taking to it, Victor said. That's a good sign. Edda stayed by the rail, her breath misting in the cold. There's something steady in this, she said. Hard but steady. Victor looked up at her. You thinking of staying through lambing season? You think I'd run now? She asked. No, he said softly. Not anymore. Later that morning, while Victor hauled feed to the upper pen, Edda stood on a stool in the corner bedroom, pinning calico curtain hems in place. The windows had been bare for years, dust settling in the corners like old regret. She worked quietly, her stitches even, her brow furrowed in thought. Holden sat nearby, sanding a block of wood into the shape of a horse. He paused, watching her. Ma, he said, do you think we'll have a garden here? She turned, surprised. Why do you ask that? Victor said the soil's good after snow, said something grow easy. She stepped down, smoothing her skirt. Would you like to help me plant one? He nodded, eyes bright. I could dig. We'll need seeds and a fence to keep the rabbits out. I'll ask Victor about the fence, he said, lifting his wooden horse. That evening, Victor came in with a gash across his forearm, the sleeve torn and blood seeping down to his wrist. Edda saw it from across the room and was on her feet before he could say a word. What happened? She asked, guiding him toward the table. Fence post snapped. Wire caught me on the pullback. She fetched the basin and a strip of boiled muslin she'd set aside for mending. He winced as she pressed the cloth to the wound, but said nothing. "You should have called for me," she said. "I didn't want to worry you. You didn't want to look weak." He looked at her, startled. "Is that what you think?" "I think you carry more than you let on," she said, tying the cloth snug around his arm. "Same as me." He flexed his fingers, testing the wrap. "You do this before, plenty. My husband once split his scalp trying to fix a broken axle. I stitched it with thread meant for clothes, but it held." Victor studied her face. "You ever miss him?" She didn't answer right away. "Sometimes I miss the idea of what I wanted him to be, but not the truth of it," he nodded slowly. "That's fair." She brushed a curl from her cheek. "Do you miss anyone?" "My brother," he said quietly, "died in Kansas. Fever took him fast. We were close." "I'm sorry." He shrugged with one shoulder. "Nothing to do for it now." Outside, the wind had stilled. The last of the snowmelt trickled down the hill toward the creek, and the world smelled of thawed earth and pine. Victor stood, wincing slightly. "Thank you," he said. Edda didn't move. "You're welcome." He looked at her a moment longer, then said, "There's a warmth in this house again. I notice it more when you're near." She lowered her eyes, but her mouth curved faintly. "That's so," he nodded. "It's not just the fire." She reached for the basin. "We should check the pen before dusk. If another ewes close, she might need help. I'll go with you." They walked out into the cooling light together, the air sharp and clean. Edda's hand brushed his as they crossed the field. She didn't pull away, and neither did he. The earth dried underfoot as April deepened, and the wind began to smell of pine needles and thawed moss. Edda stood beneath the cottonwood by the chicken coop, a basket tucked against her hip, watching Victor drive in the last fence post along the north boundary. The new line would keep the sheep from wandering onto the open rise where the hill sloped too steep. He worked with a quiet rhythm, tamping the soil with firm, deliberate strokes. She waited until he finished, then stepped down the path toward him, her boots brushing through low grass. "I was thinking about the shed near the creek," she said. "If we clear the old tools, it'd make a good smokehouse." Victor glanced toward it, wiping his brow with the back of his arm. "You know how to cure meat?" "My father did," she said. "I helped him when I was young. We hung venison from long beams and packed pork in salt barrels." He set the spade aside. "That'd be useful come fall. We've had to trade for jerky the last few winters." She looked at the shed again. "It's got a strong roof, just needs a door that holds." "I'll patch it tomorrow," he said. "If you draw up what you need inside, I'll see to the rest." She nodded once, then turned slightly toward him. "You ever think what you'd be doing if you hadn't taken this land?" He squinted toward the mountains. "Maybe I'd have gone to Dakota Territory. Or hired on with a cattle drive out of Texas." "You don't miss the road?" He shook his head. "Too many nights with nothing but dirt under your back and no one waiting when you ride in. I've had my fill of that." Edda lowered her gaze to her hands, where her fingers curled around the basket's edge. "Sometimes I wonder what kind of woman I would have been if life had gone different. If I'd married a man who stayed sober. If we'd bought land together." Victor's voice was low. "You're the kind of woman who survived what others couldn't. That's not a lesser path." She looked up, startled by the certainty in his voice. "I mean it," he said. A woodpecker knocked in the distance, sharp and steady. Edda shifted her weight, then asked, "Do you want a family of your own?" He met her gaze. "I already feel like I have one." She didn't look away. "You sure, Victor?" "I've never been more sure of anything." That night, after the children were asleep, Edda sat with her mending in the parlor while Victor cleaned the rifle he kept above the hearth. The fire cast long shadows across the floorboards. She stitched in silence for a time, then set the shirt aside and looked at him. "I haven't shared a bed with a man since before Hattie was born." Victor set the cloth aside and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I won't ask more than you want to give." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm not afraid." He waited. She stood, smoothing her skirt. "Do you want me to come to you tonight?" He rose slowly. "Yes." They stepped into the hallway without touching, the quiet between them full of breath and decision. In the bedroom, she undid the buttons of her bodice with steady fingers, and he unlaced his shirt with the same reverence he used handling a new foal. When they stood before each other, nothing rushed. There was space enough for honesty and the slow undoing of grief. His hand found her waist as though it had always known the way, and hers traced the scar that curved along his ribs. "You're not afraid," she whispered. "No," he said. "Not with you." They lay down beneath the quilt she'd mended that first week, and when he kissed her, it was with both care and certainty. She closed her eyes, not from fear, but because she knew, finally, she was wanted. Afterward, she rested her head against his chest. He wrapped his arm around her, fingers brushing the braid that trailed down her back. "You warm enough?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "I've never felt safer." Outside, the wind moved through the pines and carried the sound of the creek down toward the pasture. Inside, the fire burned low, and two people who had been broken found, at last, a place to begin again. The following weeks passed in a rhythm Edda had never known before. Days filled with purpose fencing repairs, bread rising in the kitchen, Holden learning to read his first sentences by the light of the front window. Hattie followed Victor out to the barn each morning, dragging a stuffed cloth rabbit and asking questions about sheep with the solemnity of a judge. Edda watched them from the porch more often than not, hands busy with sewing, heart learning a different kind of quiet. One cool morning, Victor came in with a folded paper in his hand, his expression unreadable. He set it on the table where Edda was shaping dough into small rounds. "Letter came by post rider," he said, "from the county office." She wiped her hands on her apron before lifting the paper. His name was printed across the top in black ink, but the second line caught her breath. "Petition for guardianship," she read. Victor nodded slowly. "Saw the clerk last time I was in town. Told him I wanted to make things official. For Holden and Hattie," her hands stilled. "You did that on your own." "I didn't want you to think I was trying to take anything from you," he said. "I just wanted it known if anything ever happened, they'd be mine to care for. No one else would get a say." Edda stepped back from the table. "You take that on." "I already have." She folded the paper carefully and placed it back on the table. Then she walked over and wrapped both hands around his. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to. Just sign it with me." The next day they rode into Helena together. The children stayed with the Hendry sisters, who lived down by the creek and had mothered half the valley at one time or another. Holden waved from the doorway with a crust of bread in his hand, and Hattie clung to Edda's shawl until she was promised a story and a cup of boiled milk. They rode in silence at first, the wagon wheels creaking over packed earth and damp roots. Then Edda shifted slightly on the seat. "My father was a surveyor," she said. "He mapped the land between Fargo and the Missouri River. Said he never wanted to live in one place long." Victor glanced at her. "And your mother died young, fever. That's why I learned to sew, cook, mend. There wasn't anyone left to do it but me." He nodded once. "You ever think about leaving?" "Not anymore." They filed the petition at the clerk's office. Victor's name went first, then hers. The man behind the desk stamped it with a firm hand and told them it would be entered into the county record by week's end. Outside, the sky was bright with thin clouds and sharp light. They stood by the wagon, the paper still warm between them. "You'll be their father now," Edda said softly. "If you'll let me." She stepped close and rested her forehead against his chest. He held her, one hand at the back of her neck, steady as stone. They were married 2 weeks later in the small chapel near Fort Benton. The preacher was an old friend of Victor's late brother, a man with kind eyes and a worn Bible. Edda wore a pale green dress she'd altered herself, and Victor shaved clean for the first time in a year. Holden carried a sprig of sage in his pocket, and Hattie wore a crown of dried wildflowers Edda had woven that morning. After the vows, Edda and Victor stood outside the chapel in the wind's hush. He touched her cheek with a reverence that made her breath catch. "I never thought it would feel like this," she said. "Like what?" "Like coming home." That night, back at the ranch, they sat on the porch while Holden and Hattie slept in their narrow beds. The stars hung low and bright, and the air smelled of warm grass and cedar smoke. Victor laced his fingers with hers. "I used to think quiet was loneliness," he said, "but now it feels like peace." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "That's because it's shared." He turned and kissed her temple, then her mouth, slow and sure. In the months that followed, the smokehouse was finished and hung with strips of venison and salted pork. The garden grew thick with beans and onions, and Victor built a small wooden swing beneath the cottonwood for Hattie. Holden learned to saddle a horse on his own and rode beside Victor to check the far fence lines. Edda taught herself to make cheese from the milk their one cow gave. She packed it in waxed cloth and sold it to the Hendrys and the storekeep in Helena. Her name began to carry weight in the valley, quiet, steady weight, earned by doing what needed doing without complaint. One morning in late summer, Victor brought her a folded piece of cloth tobacco brown muslin, soft and thick. She opened it and looked up at him. "Thought you might want something new," he said, "for church or just because." She ran her hand over the fabric. "You remembered I like earth colors." "I remember everything you tell me," he said. She sewed a dress from it and wore it the next Sunday, Holden at her side, Hattie clinging to her hand. Victor stood behind them, one hand resting lightly against her back. When the preacher called on families to stand and give thanks, Edda looked up into Victor's face and saw there the life they'd built piece by piece, stitch by stitch, not from ease but from the kind of love that doesn't speak much, but never leaves. And for the first time in all her years, she knew she would never have to run again.